Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. It was just a wild rivalry week. We had as many midfield fights as I have seen in a very long time. Lots of flags being planted at midfield of a lot of different places and a lot of very upset home teams. Led to some kerfuffles, one way to put it. We'll discuss all that here. Plus, a stunning result in the game. Michigan beats Ohio State, a result that I don't think anybody was expecting. And then our college football playoff race got a little bit clearer, and we're going to dig into all of it right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into it, though, got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good, Garrett. Regular season play is over with the exception of Army and Navy. We now enter the postseason stage of the season. Now, it's not necessarily one and done. Some teams will lose in their conference championship game, still make their way into the college football playoffs, but postseason nonetheless. It's been a heck of a regular season in college football, and the new season begins, again, with the exception of Army Navy.
Yeah, and we're getting into conference championship weekend, and it's a huge weekend across college football because, look, there's some teams who might be able to play their way into the tournament. There are some who may get eliminated altogether, and I think there's a reasonable thought that if these teams make it to the conference championship game, then they should have the benefit of the doubt, but that's just not the case. It's not how this game works, unfortunately, and some team out there is going to get burned by that fact, So we'll discuss all that and a little bit more here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. While you're joining us, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, make sure to follow along. We're jumping into bowl season. We got a lot of things happening, so we got to continue that conversation all around bowl talk. Abe Gordon and Garrett Chapman right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Let's jump into the game. Michigan, Ohio State, 13-10. I was absolutely stunned by the result of this game. This is a game that I fully expected, and I said this on our show on Saturday morning, it wasn't that Ohio State was going to win. It was about how much they were going to win by and when Ryan Day was going to be able to call off the dogs and, Michigan was going to be able to lick its wounds. Not exactly what happened. Now you're going to have a senior class graduate from Ohio State having never beaten Michigan. 0-4 in their last 4 games. Will Howard. He's picked off twice in this game. The rushing attack just continues to be dreadful. I don't know if it's offensive line play. I don't know if it's just these guys aren't who we thought they were, Quinshon Judkins and Trevion Henderson. But the fact that Judkins only goes for 46 on 12 carries, and you had Henderson going for 21 on 10 carries, this team is just not getting it done. It's unacceptable. And this is a game that, this was a slugfest. It's a physical football game, and this is what I expected to see. But there's no excuse for you to lose a football game where your opposing quarterback scores or only accounts for 62 yards of offense. That's just unacceptable. It's really bad. Throwing for 62 yards and you lose that game, it's inexplicable. And I know the heat is going to go straight to Ryan Day, and it should. It absolutely should, because I have no earthly idea how that team loses to Michigan. Ohio State had everything it needed. Every single thing that Ryan Day asked for, he got, and he still cannot get over the Michigan hump. I don't know what it is about this game with him that it doesn't seem to be working out, Abe. But it's an inexplicable loss made worse by the fact that now you don't get to go to the Big Ten championship game. You're not going to have a chance to go get a first-round bye. You may have cost yourself a home playoff game too. You may fall all the way out of the top 8. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. You lose in that fashion. You play a game like that after scuffling by a couple of times throughout the course of the regular season. I'm not that impressed. And this is just an abysmal game and a terrible performance for Ohio State.
Yeah, and look, you can question Ryan Day, and rightfully so. I want to start by questioning Chip Kelly. You've got NFL talent all over this team. You bring in a quarterback out of the transfer portal that was a playmaker at Kansas State the past couple of years, and you find Jeremiah Smith for 1 10-yard touchdown pass. That's all you can muster against this Michigan team. And look, the run game has been a problem all year long, despite the talent of Judkins and Henderson. Chip Kelly couldn't get much out of them really for the majority of the season, here and there, sure, but when you needed them, they weren't there. You got multiple first-round NFL receivers. You can't get the ball to them enough. It just wasn't good enough on offense. And I think defensively, especially considering how Michigan scored its touchdowns and field goals, setting themselves up with defensive plays. Defensively, you're not upset really at Ohio State and what they were able to accomplish. This is a loss that is completely on the offense. And so as much credit or focus is going to be on Ryan Day, I think equal amounts on Chip Kelly. That being said, I mean, I have a tough time now believing, because I believe, and we'll talk about it as we go, I believe the two teams with the highest potential, the highest ceiling on the season were Ohio State and the Georgia Bulldogs. The biggest issue isn't whether or not in any one game situation they can win. How are either of these teams going to feel good about putting together a 3, potentially a 4-game run in the playoffs against quality competition, where one loss will end your season from this point forward for Ohio State? They may have more talent and be able to put it together. Can they do it multiple weeks in a row? I just don't know at this point. They're just not falling back on anything offensively that you can believe in. And so this is I mean, Garrett, we don't have to walk around the subject. This is an atrocious loss. There's no softening the blow here. Your
They
national
were 21-point favorites, Abe. That's the biggest spread in 50 years.
Your favorites to go in and win the Big Ten title. To lose this game at home in a rivalry game where you've lost 4 straight, I don't really know what to say. It's probably going to cost your head coach his job, depending on the next month or 5 weeks of college football, if you even survive that long. So we'll see what ends up happening there for Ryan Day and the head man there, but might do you some good to take some time during Big Ten title game weekend, since you're no longer playing in it, and freshen up that resume, freshen up that cover letter, and get ready, because this gig, which is one of the best in college football, might be taken away from you.
Yeah. Not one of the best. It might be the best job in college football. I mean, there aren't a lot of places in this sport that you could go to your boosters or just go to the media and say that I need $20 million to win, and then you get $20 million to go win. That's not normal, and that's not something that a lot of places can do. And look, it's made that much worse by the fact that you have this incredible group of seniors who came back for this. And Mickey Ibuka, Travion Henderson, Jack Sawyer. You have these guys who were bona fide first-round draft picks, or at least day 2 picks, all of them. And all these guys came back to win this game. And you don't get it done. And it's not even the fact that you lost. It's the way that you lost. You looked so bad. I mean, this is a game that I wasn't able to watch the whole game, and then I had to go back and watch what I missed. But it was, I turned it on probably halfway through the second quarter, and I'm I was fully expecting something crazy. I hadn't been able to follow it, so I didn't know what was happening, and I was fully sure that this game was going to be pretty much a rout by the second quarter, because I expected Ohio State to jump on them, and once they got a 14-point lead, then it was just going to be, that was it. And if I looked at the Michigan box score, that's pretty much what it looked like, as if Ohio State dominated this game. It's just the fact that the Ohio State offense is exactly what we worried it would be with Will Howard. Not good enough. Just not good enough. And it's made even worse by the fact that the guy you ran off is having one of the best seasons in college football. So, yes, Ryan Day is feeling the heat, and he should be. It's just that, does he deserve to be fired for that loss? I don't think so. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't think Ohio State fans fully understand what's on the other side.
It's also, that's true, but you can't look at it in a glass bottle. He's not being fired for this loss, like on one pedestal. No, and I know you're not suggesting that, but the way you got to be careful what you ask the question. He's being fired if he gets fired, and I agree with you. I'm not necessarily as convinced as all of the people who are on social media over the course of this whole weekend being like, he's done. That's it. Like, one, I definitely don't think they're firing him before the playoffs. Like, I don't think they're going to make a change here.
No, they still have a
Garrett,
chance to
you've
win a
seen
national
it. You've seen it
championship.
written, though, the same as I have. Like, there have been those suggestions like that he shouldn't even coach in the playoffs. And I just don't believe that to begin with. And then, look, I don't know the buyout situation, but I do agree with you. I would be very, very careful about getting rid of a guy like Ryan Day based on what could be on the other side. I mean, look, you were potentially very close to hiring Luke Fickell a couple years ago. Luke Fickell, what would this program be right now? And I'm a big Luke Fickell fan. I am, but he has not gotten things going in his Big Ten job. I mean, I agree with you. I think the grass is not always greener, but you got to beat this team. You certainly got to beat this team as 20-point favorites, as national championship contenders against an unranked at home. Like, there's no excuse for what happened out there. And it's really not even about whether he's a good coach or can win. Mm-hmm. It's really about whether the people who make these decisions are tired of watching him lose this one game. Yeah. If they are tired of it to the point where they're like, no more, then he's done. And if they are at the point of I know that we haven't gotten past Michigan, but I don't think we're going to upgrade. And so we're going to keep plugging ahead with what we have, then his job's safe.
Yeah. It just depends on who they want to who they'd want to hire, and he's a pretty damn.
The question is who excites the fan base. There are a lot of because if you're going to fire him, you got to get someone that is going to excite the fan base.
You're not going to get Brian Kelly, right?
Oh, that's not who I was thinking. Does Matt Campbell do it for you?
Matt Campbell's.
He's obviously
Matt Campbell's leaving Iowa State.
I'm just theoretically suggesting, like, he's obviously red hot again with what he's done at Iowa State this year. Sure. Potentially could get hotter if they win the title game in their conference, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But like, is that the hottest name right now in coaching? I mean,
like, do they want the hot name, or do they want a guy who's going to come in and win? That's the thing. We're having a kind of a rhetorical conversation, a speculative conversation, not rhetorical. One that may not even come to pass because Ohio State, they can still go off and win a national championship.
I actually don't think they're going to fire him. I know a lot of people are convinced at the end of the year. No, I don't even think at the end of the year. I really don't.
Still be surprised. I know we've been talking about this for a little while now. The words have come out of my mouth once or twice, I'm sure. But it's the idea that
we jokingly said he should be fired if they don't beat Michigan because we never thought they would actually lose to Michigan. And so, like, there is some context because I've said that probably 5 times, Garrett. You've probably said it 3 times on this podcast over the course of this season, like especially like the hot seat stuff that we had at the beginning of the year. Like, we both said, like, if he doesn't beat Michigan this year, he'll probably get fired. Like, we just never considered that he actually would. Like. Until we're like,
and that makes it all the more worse. That makes it so much worse. Like, the fact that this is the worst Michigan team of the last 4 years, easily, without question. This is probably the worst Michigan team of the last 8 years or so. And at least that COVID season. I mean, my God, this team sucks. It's not a good football team coached by Sharon Moore. They don't even have the guy who at head coach who made them that competitive. It's and you lost. So maybe he needs to be fired. I really don't know, but I just know something is going to come of this game. It has to. But ultimately what happens is Penn State beats Maryland, a hapless Maryland team, and they move into the Big Ten championship game. Through the back door. Good for them. James Franklin has a big opportunity. He can go win his first Big Ten championship since 2017.
I don't want just one last thing. The other thing is the other side of this is like, okay, you didn't beat Michigan. You're not going to be winning a Big Ten title. You are still going to be in the playoffs, and you can still prove some things here this year. And so the season's not done. They obviously have things they got to work on and figure out. Yeah. But the ultimate prize is still there to be had for them if they can get hot at the right time.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to. You got to go out and get hot at the right time. But I will say this too. It's the fact that this happened. Syracuse beat Miami 42-38, and Kyle McCord is the reason why. That's just got to make yesterday sting all the more because Kyle McCord, 380 yards, 3 tutties for him, the former Ohio State Buckeye, who they ran out of town. That was a pretty good offense, at least when Kyle McCord was running it. Not anymore. But Miami continues to play with fire. Syracuse actually, I would say, controlled this game pretty much from start to finish. And when we were doing our show on Saturday, I said that if this game gets up into the high scoring, believe it or not, this favors Syracuse, and that's what happens. They're now 8-0 when they score 31 points or more because this team likes to score, and they can score in a hurry. It wasn't even any one thing that they did per se. Xavier Restrepo goes off in this game, but every single Syracuse receiver seemingly went off as well. You get 4 different guys go for 50 yards or more. Both teams rushed for over 100 yards, but Damian Martinez, he gets 84 on the ground in this one. But it's just a stunning game that I think will have reverberating effects throughout the ACC, especially with Clemson also losing. We'll talk about that game here in just a moment. But I think the ACC did just become a one big league again. And the SEC is sitting there celebrating.
Yeah, I don't know if the ACC is a one bid league. I'm not going to go quite that far yet. I don't think Miami is in the discussion. That's my opinion, though. We'll see what the committee has to say about that. But I'm not convinced that they're one bid league, depending on the results of the ACC title game. We can get into that in a moment. Look, Miami had this game in hand. They're up 21-0 the early stage of the second quarter, and it just completely fell apart for them, and they could not get it going. And Syracuse was very close early on in this game to a couple touchdowns, and things went against them. They fell behind 21-0, but they kept plugging away and crawled back into this game. The other thing that was impressive is Miami had a chance at the end of the game to get the ball back, and Syracuse ran the ball like 8 straight times to kill nearly 4 minutes of game clock until that thing was on 000. The ability of Syracuse to run out the clock is not something we had talked about. I was watching this game, and I was like, man, are they going to have to throw like with 3 minutes left? Because that's what their offense is. And you need to run the clock, but you also risk stopping the clock and all that. No, they were running the ball, and they got the job done. So really impressive by Syracuse. You and I both thought this was a danger zone game. Miami had played around with it. A lot of times just the offenses they were competing against just weren't good enough to nab them. I'm not really that surprised in the results of this game at all, to be honest. I thought Kyle McCord could get the job done, and he did. And you're right. He was completely run out of town. A lot of blame was placed on him in regards to what happened at Ohio State and Ryan Day last year. And to watch what happened at Ohio State this year, combined with Syracuse and some of the big games that he's had over the course of this season, good for him to keep his head up, still play quality level of college football. And Miami, in my opinion, we'll see. But in my opinion, they are now on the outside.
I agree. And they're on the outside of the ACC championship game, most importantly. And look, I know Mario Cristobal is going to be criticized for the late game field goal. He opted to take the points. He says that he trusted his defense to go out and get a stop, right? Okay. I don't know what defense he's been watching Miami play for most of this season that gave him the confidence that his defense was going to go out there and get a stop. I no earthly idea. It's just one of the many confounding decisions that Mario Cristobal continues to make. I just don't get it. It's something that they've come very close to the edge multiple times this season, and I think they've finally gotten pushed over. They are done. I agree. This is not a team that, in my eyes, deserves to slot in the final field of 12. If they had gotten to the ACC championship game and lost on that stage, I would probably be saying this a little bit differently. But no, this isn't a team that deserves it. If you don't make your conference championship game in the ACC, then you probably aren't going to be making it in, because this team is. It's just the offense is fun, and that's why I'm so frustrated by it. Just to an extent, I mean, it's this offense and this team is so good when they are clicking. It's just the defense is that bad. Because if you score 38 points in a college football game, there's no excuse not to win that game, period. There's just make no bones about it. But Kyle McCord, good for Fran Brown and company. Huge win. 9 wins in your first year with Fran Brown is just a slam dunk for the Orange. And I think that this is about as good a situation as it could have been, especially for a Syracuse team that looked at one point like it was going to come off the rails. They had that loss against Stanford earlier in the season. They lost to Pitt, and then they lost to Boston College. And especially that loss to Boston College was one that I felt like was just kind of an ugly football game. They didn't play their best. But 9-3, year one of Fran Brown. I got a lot of good things to say about him in his first year. And getting Kyle McCord out of the transfer portal has been just a stroke of good luck for him. But let's move into the SEC. And first of our SEC ACC matchups that we saw over the course of the weekend. This one, South Carolina, they get the win over Clemson, 17-14. Lenore Sellers just continues to be one tough son of a bitch. The dude is just, dude's fun. The dude's fun. And South Carolina, they score 10 points in the fourth quarter, and they come back and get the road win over the Clemson Tigers. And Abe, is that enough to get them into the college football playoff? I know that's going to be the question that a lot of people are asking over the next 2 weeks.
I think it is, but there's still a couple things at play here. And obviously, and now I guess we can talk about it. The ACC, can it be a 2-bid league? Clemson now, and what a range of emotions for Clemson over the course of the day, right? You watch your team lose to South Carolina. You're down in the dumps. Season's over. You're not going to make the college football playoffs. Hold on. Watch this coming out of Syracuse. Miami falls. And all of a sudden you're in the ACC title game. You're going to have an opportunity to play your way in. Can the ACC be a 2-bid league, US? If Clemson wins the ACC title game, how much does SMU get penalized there? Could SMU still stay high enough ranked as an at-large with Clemson getting an automatic berth? That's the question. That's the road now, in my opinion, to the ACC being a 2-bid league. That's because I don't have Miami in. But again, we'll see what they do. So, bid stealers, if you want to call them that. The ACC certainly has one. That's probably the only one that I would say was a quote bid stealer. In my opinion, South Carolina should be in over Ole Miss and Alabama. I know Lane Kiffin feels differently. I'm sure Kalen DeBoer feels differently. They're both going to claim, about South Carolina. But again, the team's playing better now than it has at any point in the rest of the season. They continue to trend up. Lenore Sellers was outstanding again with his legs, including the game-winning run with about 20 or I think it was 20 seconds left, 12 seconds left, whatever it was. And he's a menace. It wasn't necessarily with his arms. We've seen him get it done with his arms in previous games. This one was definitely with his legs. Very impressive. The defense continues to be not that it was any surprise, but a real problem. And Clemson, I thought, really held strong in terms of protecting Cade Klubnik, 3 tackles for loss. But South Carolina, man, the defense was on top of it. They did force an interception. They also got a fumble. So, again, if you're going to ask me right now why I think South Carolina should be in over Ole Miss and Alabama, there's not going to be a metric I'm going to point to. It's not going to be look at their wins compared to those two. Look at their losses. Head-to-head certainly doesn't favor them. It is going to be about which team would you rather play right now. And I think I'd rather play Alabama than South Carolina. I think I'd rather play Ole Miss than South Carolina. There's no metric. That's why we have people on the committee to make those arguments. Their job is tasked with the 12 best teams, not the 12 resume whatevers. That's why I would have South Carolina in. I know that's kind of very, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but it's up to everyone else to kind of give their own thoughts on that. But that's why I would have them in. Yeah,
and look, and if you're Clemson, you've now lost to the 3 best teams that you faced this season. Just not good. Not good season. Not a good season for Dabo Swinney's squad. And look, they're going to backdoor their way into the ACC championship. Good for them. I think that they still have a great opportunity to win the conference and really put things to bed and move forward into the playoff. But it's just been kind of an up and down season for Dabo Swinney's squad. I don't really know if they ever fully got going consistently against like the top flight competition. Like they had that stretch in the middle of the season right after they lost to Georgia, and they were cooking there for a minute, and it looked like they'd finally turned that corner and they'd gotten back to kind of what that type of Clemson team that we expect to see every week. But big win for South Carolina. Probably this might be Shane Beamer's biggest win. I know we can talk about what he did against South Carolina, but this is in your rivalry game on the road. And look, this is just a tremendous performance. A tremendous performance from Shane Beamer and this Gamecock squad. Lenore Sellers, though, I mean, I can't say enough good things about him. The dude didn't have it going really with his arm all that well, but what he could do with his legs, the guy's special. And and that's why I tend to agree. You factor in what that defense can do, specifically that front seven, and then the fact that you have Rocket Sanders and Lenore Sellers coming out of that backfield running that football, and that's a scary bunch, And I think that if we have a healthy Lenore Sellers throughout the course of this regular season, we could be talking about this South Carolina team just a little bit differently, as in they're a sure thing rather than whether there's a question or not of whether they'll make it to the 12-team field or not. But they finished the year 9-3. I think they've got a shot of making the playoff. Maybe 25-40% chance, somewhere in that range. It's a sub 50% chance, but we'll see. I think they end the season on a really high note. And I say I've combined these two right here: Alabama and Auburn, 28-14. Ole Miss and Mississippi State, 26-14. These are two teams who just needed to do what they needed to do, right? They just needed to keep their head above water. They needed to stay in good position, both do what they're supposed to do, and they defend home field.
It was I wasn't impressed by either team, and I guess I'll start on Friday. Ole Miss beats Mississippi State. The Mississippi State defense had the shackles on Ole Miss. If Mississippi State's offense didn't turn the ball over so many times and really set Ole Miss up, this game could have been different. Not impressed offensively either by Alabama. We talked about it. This is not a very good Auburn team. The fact that they were able to beat Texas A&M a week ago, notwithstanding, I just haven't been impressed by them all season long. It was fine. It was a nice win for both. Wasn't overly impressive for either. They don't gain brownie points in this, so that's kind of where I stand. Like there was maybe a chance that they would have been so impressive that they can steal a spot, over South Carolina. And look, maybe in the committee they do still have that spot over South Carolina. Yeah. If I had to lean one towards the other, it would probably be Alabama. Again, Lane Kiffin put out a tweet suggesting otherwise. I would go South Carolina, but if you want to take Alabama, then whatever.
Yeah. And look, this is for Auburn, it's very disappointing. They don't get to go to a bowl game. They finished the season 5-7, 2-6 in ACC play. And Peyton Thorne, it was a tough season for him as a starting quarterback. He ends this game with an interception. It's pretty much on brand for the way that this season has gone for the Auburn Tigers. I got a sneeze coming, so excuse me there for a second. I feel it coming.
I'll pick it up while you're going on trying to clear out the passages there. The tough part is that he follows one of his best performances a week ago against A&M, and it was one of those things where, like, can that be the norm or is that the outlier? Unfortunately, as expected, that was the outlier, and he was kind of back to being what he was in this game. He was okay. It wasn't a complete disaster, but he wasn't anything special either. And it was going to take something special for them to beat Alabama. It wasn't there. But again, Alabama wasn't overly special either.
No, I really was not all that impressed with what I saw from Alabama, all things considered. But one more thing I'll say about Auburn, it's the fact that you look at the last 3 games of what Cam Coleman's been able to do. That's somebody who you can really single out as somebody who's going to be an important part of what that team is going to do here over the next couple of years. His last 3 games, he ends up going for right at 300 yards and 6 touchdowns. So that's pretty damn good. Over the course of the final 3 games of the season. But this team's got some building blocks. I think they've got a little ways to go. Hugh Freeze, pressure's on. I know he was brought in. A lot of people were really excited to see Hugh Freeze come into that offense and into that program. But so far, the results just have not been good enough. He just needs to get a quarterback. Peyton Thorne was just not the guy. But on the Alabama sideline, Jalen Milroe, he got back to using his legs a little bit in this game, which I really liked to see. Jam Miller got going a little bit here too, but this is really, this offense is based around Jalen Milroe, just full stop. And if he goes, great. And if he doesn't, we've seen how bad Alabama can be. And I don't think that Alabama did enough for me necessarily to put them over the hump and really push them in. And that's why I put Ole Miss and Mississippi State in here with them. It's because Ole Miss didn't either. They didn't really look all that impressive against a hapless Mississippi State squad. So they had two rivalry games, two of the biggest rivalry games in the SEC, and neither really did enough to convince me that they were that good, right? That they were that much better and that much more deserving. And your backs are against the wall. It may be just a little bit too little, too late. But let's move into another game in the SEC. The Georgia Bulldogs, they take down the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets in probably what I think is the greatest college football game that I have ever seen in person. It was nuts. 8 overtimes, Abe Gordon. I know we talked about this a little bit on Saturday, but this is a game that Georgia Tech absolutely had in the bag. Georgia Tech was the better football team for pretty much the entire game up until the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter where Georgia just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. And they did everything they needed to do. You're down 2 touchdowns late, and you get the benefit of a fumble from Haynes King in the fourth quarter. Doesn't get you a short field to go tie the game, and then it's overtime. And people can talk about the decision that Brent Key made to not go for 2 at the end of the first quarter, of the first overtime. You can question play calls of what teams were doing and what the two teams were doing when they were trying to go to the alternating 2-point conversions, which admittedly I've said this on Twitter as well. It's the dumbest way to decide a football game. I think it's it's an unmitigated disaster. That's not the way football's played. But here we are. Look, there are a lot of thoughts that I have from this game, but Georgia Tech losing it, it's not the fact that Georgia came out and won this football game. It's that Georgia Tech kind of choked it away. And it's very disappointing. I know it's very disappointing for Brent Key, very disappointing for Haynes King, who was clearly, in my opinion, the best player on that football field. He looked healthy for the first time in the last 5 weeks or so. And it unlocks that level of potential of what the Georgia Tech offense and that Georgia Tech team can be if he is healthy and playing at full strength, which he's not at full strength, but they will be when he gets to the bowl game coming up in December or January, wherever they end up playing. But the Dogs, they effectively clinch a playoff berth. I know people were clamoring about the broadcast. I couldn't hear the broadcast. I was at the game. I was down on the sideline for this game, and I'm glad I was. But I do think that Georgia's effectively locked up a playoff berth with this win, but they may even get a bye because now they get to go play in the SEC championship game. But this was a wild, wild football game.
Well, there's 2 main storylines here for me. There's the game itself, and then there's what's going on with Georgia, and I'll get to that in a moment. Outstanding fight put up by Georgia Tech. They gave everything they had and more. I do think they should have gone for 2 and either win it or lose it right there. Just dial up whatever you think is your best play. Now, on the flip side, we saw a bunch of 2-point conversions. None of them were good plays, so that's its own decision. But outstanding fight by Georgia Tech. They got yes, you have to lose the game, but nothing to be hanging your heads about. Very impressive showing for them. The question for Georgia, and we could tell pretty early, or at least I could, they got to find a way to bring it every game, and they just aren't. I talked about it leading into this game. If Georgia has their A game, it's not going to be that competitive. If they don't, there's no reason Tech can't win it. And that's kind of what we saw. They did not have their A game. They eventually found it, certainly on offense in the second half. But I don't know if you're going to beat Texas next week without playing and looking the way you did the first time against them. Because if you show up and play the way you did against Georgia Tech, it's not there. Certainly wasn't defensively. And so that's the question for Ohio State. I think it's also the question for Georgia. I think they are talented enough to win a national championship. Can they bring it multiple games in a row? That is the big question. You look at their schedule, there's not a single 3-game stretch that I would say they brought it all 3 games. They're going to have to find a way to do that in the college football playoff. to survive and advance against better opponents than they have had on a given week necessarily. So I think they can still win a national championship, but they have to be able to bring their A game, and they did not do it on Friday night. It almost cost them this game. It potentially almost cost them an opportunity to stay alive for the college football playoff. But I think win or lose the SEC title game, they are in.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's just where they are. They have a pretty large benefit of the doubt, So they were probably that team entering this season when we talked about it. They're probably the squad that had the most room for error. This was the room for error game, and it looked like it showed. But Georgia Tech was a more physical team. They won. They whipped their ass. It's just I will say this about Georgia Tech too. There aren't a lot of teams that are more physical than Georgia Tech on any given week. That's something that they've been really effective at building there on the flats and in that program. And I commend Brent Key and that program for what they've been able to do. But the big highlight here for me, though, is the fact that Carson Beck has figured it out. I think Carson Beck is the guy that Georgia needed him to be throughout the course of this season. The problem is you still have some glaring holes on that wide receiver core. There were some abysmal drops. There were some plays and moments in that game where the whole thing could have been flipped on its head. The whole damn thing. Arian Smith had I think he was responsible for 2 or 3 or 4 of those drops that they had in this game. And God, it was one of them I have. It's a video on my phone of him catching. The ball was just delivered to him perfectly. Hits him on the hands in front of his face mask, just right here in front of his face. And the ball just clanks off of his hands. And I'm sorry. If you want to go win a national championship, you got to make plays like that. You just have to make plays. And right now, I don't know if these Georgia wide receivers are making enough plays to get it done. I think Carson Beck is. And I think the health of Etienne is going to be extremely important as they move into the SEC championship next week and into the playoff after that. But who are they going to be playing? That was also decided on Saturday. Texas handles Texas A&M 17-7. I think they did a really good job of handling the adversarial environment of Aggieland. College Station and that field was rocking. The environment over there in College Station was tremendous, and you could feel the energy that was coming out of that place. The only problem is the Texas A&M offense didn't get a lot of that energy. Texas just smothered them on offense. The only points that came in this game came on a defensive touchdown, and it looked like Texas A&M was going to continue getting those turnovers. It's something that Texas has struggled a little bit this week, or with that this year, is turning the ball over. It's what cost them the game against Georgia. It's what nearly cost them the game against Vanderbilt. And they have the turnovers again in this one. It isn't enough to cost them just because I think the defense was playing at a really high level. But I think the most exciting thing about this game, if you're a Longhorns fan, is the fact that you found a running game. Wisner went off. He went buku in this game. 33 carries, 186 yards for the young man there. But Quinn Ewers does just enough. He does a little bit with his legs as well. Arch Manning did it with his legs. He got the first touchdown of this game, and he scampers down that sideline, and he's become a good weapon for this team. And I think that's something that we could see from them in the playoff is potentially running kind of that 2 quarterback look where Arch Manning can come in and kind of make an impact with his legs. And just the threat to throw is going to be really good. But ultimately, it's just just not enough from the Aggies, and Texas A&M handles business.
Yeah, a couple of things here. Marcel Reed gave it his all. He's not the reason Texas A&M couldn't get going on offense. The running backs didn't help out. Only 42 yards rushing outside of what Reed was able to do, and no one stepped up in the receiving core. I know Reed kind of spread it around and is relatively efficient, but no one really stepped up there. The difference for Texas in this game, you mentioned it, is Weissner, 186 yards. Quinn Ewers, an interception and a fumble that you alluded to. They got to clean that up. The big difference next week, and if they when they get into the college football playoffs, is can that run game work against better defensive fronts? We saw it shut down against the Georgia Bulldogs the first time out will they fare any better? Because they're kind of like Georgia. Can you get anything out of the run game to keep that offense a little bit balanced and take pressure off of a quarterback that might be prone to making mistakes? I think that's going to be a big part of what they would like to do moving forward. Can they is a different story. And so Quinn Ewers, there's questions about his ankle. I thought he fared pretty well. You did see Arch Manning because of it in some quarterback run situations. I don't know if they're going to be messing around with that too much moving forward. I think as his ankle heals, they'll probably just open him up to run. But Texas gets the job done. It was a must-win game on the road. I wouldn't say for their playoff lives necessarily, but to potentially get a bye in a first round and all that stuff, certainly. So good win for Texas on the road.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the game that Texas needed, I'd say. Just for the sake of confidence, I think it's not that they're lacking in confidence necessarily, but it's the fact that they hadn't really gotten a big performance against a quality opponent. When I say quality, I mean like a team that could potentially play in a college football playoff. They hadn't had a win against one of those types of teams. They haven't faced a lot of those types of teams this season. And the one time they did, they lose by 15. But now you have a chance to rectify that. You can go play Georgia and Athens and put all that to bed. You got to be a little bit more consistent on offense. The Texas offense now has looked kind of shaky over the course of a couple of weeks. I know we talked about Wisner. I mean, like his play here as of late, in this game specifically, I mean, like it gives you a lot of confidence moving into the game against Georgia, especially a Georgia defense that has really been struggling against the run over the course of the last couple of weeks. Giving up 200 plus yards in consecutive games is not the Georgia way. So if Wisner's going, if he's cooking, it could put a brand new wrinkle into this game that we didn't previously expect. But after that Florida win, where they looked like they were well on their way to being one of the best offenses in college football, now it's sandwiched between two kind of pedestrian performances on offense, where you score 27 points on the road at Vanderbilt, 20 points on the road against Arkansas. It was a solid performance, but then you look shaky again. And the theme in that is that all of those games happened on the road where they were shaky and they looked really good at home. And now you don't get to play Georgia in Athens. It's not like that's how it's going to happen. But it is going to be in Atlanta, and it's not going to be at the confines of your home stadium. So I wonder how they continue to play. You're not going to have the rowdy type of environment. So I wonder how well that offense is going to carry. That's really my biggest question mark with that one. But we're not previewing that game. We're still talking about this game, and we will preview that one later on this week. So make sure to give us a follow, like the podcast, and subscribe because we talk all things college football. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman, right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. But the SEC race just got a little bit more clear. But one thing that also got clear is the fact that Notre Dame is going to be in the college football playoff. They end their season 11-1, and now we just wait to see where they fall. Based off of the teams in front of them, and by virtue of Miami losing, by virtue of Ohio State losing, they may have just locked up that 5 seed, that all-important 5 seed that I think is, in all honesty, probably the best playoff spot, if I'm being completely honest. You get to start the season, the playoff run by playing the 12 seed, which admittedly is the worst conference champion, likely the worst conference champion. And then you get to play in a bowl game against the worst of the Power 5, or the 4 best teams, right? So you're going to play the 4th seed. So I think it's the best case scenario for Notre Dame, and they look good in this game. USC, on the other hand, not very good, but not as bad as it has been over the course of this season. It ends a very disappointing season for Lincoln Riley and the USC Trojans, their first season in the Big Ten.
One of the things for me for Notre Dame is just getting this one. This was a decently well-fought game. I think it was tied at 35-35 before Notre Dame kind of grabbed hold of it in the later stages of this one. USC just couldn't quite keep pace. They secure their bid and move forward. They continue to play well, certainly on offense. They're going to have to deal with a couple of defensive injuries suffered in this one as well. But nothing they haven't been without. Some of the secondary members got banged up. But, I don't know if I wouldn't say they've locked in the 5 seed. It's still, if Oregon were to lose, Penn State gets an auto bid and maybe Oregon's 5, Notre Dame 6. But they're in that discussion. They're very safely going to be in the playoffs, and I would imagine, as you're kind of referencing, hosting a first round game. So they're going to have every opportunity granted to them to move on. So should be interesting. But Notre Dame has just gotten better and better as the course of the season's gone on, especially offensively, and they're gonna try and bring it in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's the fact that they got back-to-back pick sixes in this game that both of these go effectively go 100 yards. And it's one of those things that makes me believe that this is not quite as lopsided of a game as the scoreline might indicate, 49-35. USC had every opportunity to win this game. They were driving the ball on Notre Dame. They drove the ball pretty effectively, and they had the turnover on downs to start the game. But you have 2 pick sixes, and that's a backbreaker. And you were only down 7 points, and Notre Dame wasn't able to get anything going. You marched all the way down the field twice, and then you throw an interception in the end zone twice. Just tough, just really tough if you're USC, because I'm not fully convinced that Notre Dame is the 5th best team in America. It's just that no one's really tested them, and this was really that big opportunity for someone to test them, and USC just proved that they are not that team. We'll see how they actually end up doing in the playoffs. I think they're going to be an interesting team, because I think if Notre Dame's playing really good football, if they're playing their best version of playing that best brand of football, then they're a solid team that can cause some problems when they get to the postseason. But we shall see. But this, I wanted to include this as just more as of a nugget, that just to confirm that they made it to the final field of 12. But last place here, speaking of 12, the Big 12, we have our title game all locked up. This was the one that was going to be really the wildest of the 4 power conferences. And at one point on Friday, 9 different teams had a chance to make the conference championship game, which is just nuts to think about. Nuts to think about. By the end of Friday, however, it was down to 6. And then by the end of Saturday night, it was just 2. Colorado, they blow out Oklahoma State 52-0. BYU beats Houston 30-18, but it doesn't matter, because Iowa State beat Kansas State 29-21, and Arizona State blows out Arizona 49-7. And really the biggest one that I'm looking at is Arizona State. I think that team has been one of the most fun squads to follow over the course of this season. With Scadaboo and Leavitt and Tyson, that little trio of players has been a really good football team. They've made them a very dangerous football team. And we talk about we talk about South Carolina, just as that team that nobody really wants to play. That's kind of Arizona State. So they have a chance to go win a Big 12 championship in Dillingham's 2nd season, and look, just cap off just a spectacular rise from a season that we didn't really expect them to do all that much. A lot of people had them pegged to finish probably 10, 11, 12, something like that in the Big 12 conference this year at media days. And now they have a chance to go win the conference. So huge for Dillingham, huge for Iowa State and Matt Campbell to finally get up off the mat. And it looked like it was all for naught. It looked like the season had passed them by and they had let it slip. But nope, they have a chance to go play their way into a college football playoff. So good for them. Good for Campbell. Good for Dillingham. Good for the Big 12. But would have liked to see Colorado play in that game just because of the fireworks and everything with Travis Hunter and Jador Sanders and Deion Sanders and everything else. But it hurts for BYU. I'll say that too, just because they were the best team throughout the course of the regular season, the team that was the most consistent, but they went off the rails right there at the end. But the Big 12 Conference has been a fun run, and now it's going to come to a climactic end with Arizona State and Iowa State.
Yeah, impressive showing from Arizona State on the road, big rivalry game against Arizona. But that trio of Leavitt, Scadabo, and Tyson just continue to get it done on offense. And for Iowa State, it was kind of the exact opposite. Despite this game having both teams in the 20s and Iowa State almost getting to 30 points, it was not an attractive offensive game. It featured 10 punts. There were 2 missed field goals. Ridiculous inefficiency from both quarterbacks. Avery Johnson's 12 of 28. Rocco Beck's 13 of 35. The run game was okay, but nothing you'd write home about. Very interesting game, that one. But Arizona State comes in playing, and we talk about South Carolina, and we talk about some of the other teams. They're playing pretty darn good right now, and it's gonna be tough to knock them off.
Yeah, it's gonna be very tough, and it's one of those teams that you just don't want to face right now. They're cooking, and they look like they're playing with a lot of confidence. But We got our conference title race decisions made, so I think we know who's going to be playing where. We know in the Big 12, it's going to be Iowa State. It's going to be Arizona State. In the SEC, it's going to be Georgia and Texas. In the Big 10, it's going to be Penn State, and it's going to be Oregon. And then in the ACC, it's Clemson and it's SMU. So lots of faces that we didn't really expect to see. But you know what? That's why they play the game. And I think it's going to be a really compelling final week of the season. And I just cannot wait for that. So make sure you make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow along, because we will be discussing that coming up later on this week. Lots of fun action there. But that means it's time for our week shout-outs. So it's rivalry week. Abe, what you got?
Yeah, I'm just going to shout out two teams I think have played their way in courtesy of wins this weekend. Tennessee gets it done against Vanderbilt. Something to watch, I mentioned to you, though, is the potential injury to Dylan Sampson late in that game. But Tennessee takes care of business. They're going to get an at-large bid. Congratulations to them. And how about the Indiana Hoosiers rebounding from that tough defeat against Ohio State? And I know Purdue's not very good, but 66-0 is still 66-0. And you got everyone piling on Indiana, trying to discredit their victories, and I understand that. But at some point, blowouts are blowouts, and it does become impressive. And they ignored the noise, or maybe they were motivated and inspired by the noise potentially. But showcase game for them as well. So Tennessee and Indiana are, in my opinion, now safely in.
Yeah, and look, I understand where Purdue is. They're effectively an FCS team. I mean, Lord,
and they fired their head coach today.
They fired their head coach. I mean, it's about as low as it gets if you're Purdue. But Indiana, take care of business and do what you got to do. I'm gonna discuss the Group of Five real quick, just as far as your shout out goes. Tulane, they lose to Memphis in just a pull your hair out type of game on Thanksgiving. They are eliminated. The AAC as a whole likely eliminated, and to make things a little bit more difficult for them, UNLV beats Nevada and Boise State blows out Oregon State. It sets up a wild Mountain West finish. Those two are going to be playing in the title game. I don't know who's going to win that game. I know that UNLV's got a quarterback who's pretty damn good. He took over after their other quarterback quit on him after week 4. UNLV is just a fantastic season for those guys. And then there's Boise State. They got a running back who's pretty good. He might say that he wants to win the Heisman Trophy. That game is going to be must-watch television because it is for a spot in the 12-team college football playoff. It's great television, and I am very excited for that one. So we're going to preview that game. We're going to preview all of these games, all coming up on the College Football Overtime podcast next time. So you got to follow, you got to like the podcast, because look, that's how you stay in touch with everything. You can also give us a follow at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon on Twitter. We talk a lot of things, but a lot of college football. And we like to do that right here on the College Football Overtime podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again very soon.